I had one patient with breast cancer, and it was her second round with breast cancer. She was not tolerating the chemotherapy or radiation at all. She had no other options, so she used only cannabis therapy. And within about 6 months, the cancer was gone. And it was stage 4 breast cancer, Mets to bones, estrogen dominant.
You've just heard from Janna Champagne, a cannabis consultant, master herbalist, an integrative health expert who supports cancer patients through Heal Navigator. In this episode, we explore why cannabis oil is making a comeback, especially alongside therapies like Fenbendazole. Janna shares what patients need to know, from quality concerns to safety during treatment, and how to approach cannabis with clarity and confidence.
Thank you for joining in.
Yes, of course. Thanks for having me. It's nice to talk with you again, Peyton.
So why don't you just kind of touch on who you are for those that are listening today?
My name is Janna Champagne, and I am one of the consultants that works with patients through Heal Navigator to help cancer patients, find alternatives to some of the more harmful mainstream approaches. I am also a professor of integrative medicine, and I specialize in medical cannabinoid science. I have a diplomate in medical cannabinoid science. I'm a board-certified master herbalist and a retired nurse. And I'm also a graduate student working on my degree to become a naturopath. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm also a special needs mom, and I have a daughter with autism. And so a lot of my cannabis content is focused on that. But I also work with cancer patients.
You're a woman of many hats, Janna.
Yes, I am. Follow the patient needs, and it brings you many places.
So why are patients now pairing CBD with fenbendazole?
Well, CBD and other cannabis products have been utilized for cancer for many, many years. And we know that they have specific targeted uses to help get rid of the cancer. Now, we understand more recently that cancer, its development is a failure of the immune system to get rid of the cancerous cells before they become a tumor. And one of the issues that can contribute to this would be a parasitic infection. It actually suppresses the immune function, makes the immune system it makes it more difficult for the immune system to target those cancer cells. And so this is where antiparasitic therapies like the fenbendazole have come in as an adjunct to help improve the efficacy of the other therapies and really ignite the immune system against the cancer, which is really best case scenario. Natural mechanisms are always best. They're usually safest. They usually have the fewest side effects. And we're really just enabling the body to do what it should do naturally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we often hear from people who say, I tried CBD and it didn't work. Can you kind of touch on why that's such a common experience?
Oh my goodness, there are so many variations of CBD on the market. And if I had to guess, 90% of them are not optimal therapeutic quality and basically useless for things like cancer. We really want to be following really strict parameters for quality. And what I recommend to my patients is that they abide by the flow criteria when choosing their cannabis or CBD products. This would be flower-derived, lab-tested, organic, and whole plant spectrum. And like I said, they can be pretty difficult to find. So thankfully, Heal Navigator has collaborated with a brand that does meet all of these criteria, and they have cancer-targeted blends as well, meaning the ingredients in that final blend are actually evidence-based and supported by research for targeting cancer specifically. That's very important because not all blends are equal for targeting cancer either.
Right. I try to tell people that it relates kind of like essential oils. You get an essential oil, if you get it at Walmart, it's probably not going to work as well as if you get it from a higher quality source, so I can...
Yeah. Or if it's full of toxins, or if it's been stripped down. As an herbalist, there's this foundational belief that herbs are always best taken whole. And so many of the products on the cannabis market have been stripped down from the hundreds that we find in the cannabis flower down to just a few, or even one is isolate. And the research supports that this really alters the ability of that blend to offer the most possible benefits. And so this is where that whole plant piece comes in. And it's hard to find. It really is.
Especially whenever cannabis is such a popular business now.
It really is. And there's so many people in this industry that don't have the medical professional heart, and they're really just following the dollar signs. And it's, unfortunately, we're having all kinds of legislative changes now, even in the hemp industry, because we have
here in Texas.
Yeah, because we have a few bad players, and those bad apples are starting to spread to the rest of the bushel, unfortunately. It really is very important to know this information and know what you're getting, because there's some things you really don't want to waste your money on.
Well, if you are okay with it, we'd love to run through a few quick fire questions that come directly from patients, queries, and the community feedback section. So I'll just kind of throw those at you. We commonly get asked, how do I make FECO oil at home? And for those that don't know what FECO is, it's full extract cannabis oil.
Correct. And FECO it's sort of, I mean, if you've heard the term Rick Simpson oil, they're basically the same thing as an end product. How they're differentiated is that Rick Simpson, being the pioneer he was, and he helped so many cancer patients. I really honor him for that. As we know better, we do better. And unfortunately, he recommended solvents that are really toxic. And if there's any residuals left in the oil, it could actually make patients really sick. Things like isopropyl alcohol or naphtha or acetone. These are really heavy duty chemicals that we don't want to be ingesting. So in the industry, we figured out how to make that same concentrate in a food grade manner by using 190 proof food grade ethanol as a solvent instead. And you get the same draw of all of the polar and nonpolar compounds. So you still get that whole plant concentrate, but in a way that is safer for consumption. And so that's how we differentiate it and call it full extract cannabis oil. And this is one of the products that is commonly used for cancer. It's extremely concentrated, and a 1 ml syringe can be 500 or 600 milligrams of cannabinoid content, versus if you get your tincture bottle, 30 mils is 500 or 600 milligrams. So it really is a very concentrated product, and very ideal for targeting cancer, which often requires really high potency intervention. Answer how you can make the full extract cannabis oil at home. There is a beautiful product. I actually use it. It's a device called the Green Oil Machine, and it helps you to make the full extract cannabis oil at home. And it does it in a way that's much safer than many that try to do it with just their kitchen devices, because it stops the evaporation of the alcohol, which is actually an explosion or a fire risk. And it actually redistills the alcohol for later use, so you can spare it. And that bottle of alcohol that can be expensive lasts a lot longer. So that's the device that I recommend.
Okay, I didn't know that. So for those who are listening, if you're interested in making your own, definitely write that down.
It actually looks like a water distiller, and it's just been boosted up with extra seals to make sure that it will hold in the alcohol evaporate. It is made for that purpose. I've used that device for a decade. It works beautifully. And I believe the cost is around $300 or $350. It's not terrible. So it's very compact, a couple of feet tall and maybe a foot around. So it's easy to store when you're done with it. It replicates what they'll do in a big fancy lab with a bunch of expensive equipment. So, yeah, I can actually make sure that we have a link to provide. I don't make any money off of any of this, so
Right.
It's nothing like that. It's the one that I recommend to my patients.
Thank you. And so what does full spectrum actually mean?
So full spectrum is a tricky term. Now, it sounds like maybe that would be whole plant, but because we really lack any regulatory insights from this industry, still is sort of like the Wild West. We unfortunately don't have a lot of oversight over which marketing terms are utilized. So full spectrum can be utilized to describe a whole plant product, or it can be utilized to describe a very stripped down product that's like CO2 products are often called full spectrum, meaning they've separated everything out and then they take a few cannabinoids and add in some terpenes and they call it full spectrum. So it might only have a dozen compounds versus hundreds. So this is where we need to be very careful about making sure we understand this industry and the terms. And that's where reaching out to a consultant at Heal Navigator can really help you to miss a lot of these pitfalls.
So it's great. Let's kind of touch base on the different types of CBD oil for cancer. So whenever I came into this space, I thought that all cannabis products were great for all kinds of cancer, right? So you have one cannabis for one type of cancer. Mm-hmm. Then I learned that no, you definitely don't want to give high THC to someone that's estrogen positive and, because it can potentially exacerbate the cancer. So can you kind of touch base on the differences?
Yes, it really, an individualized approach is always best, not only to figure out what type of cannabis products might be ideal for that type of cancer. Like you mentioned, hormone-driven cancers is contraindicated to use THC. There are also some other cancers where it's contraindicated to use CBD, where you don't want to bring CBD into that mix. So it really is vitally important to review with a competent medical professional to get really optimal outcomes without all the experimentation and potential pitfalls. addition to whole plant, which is really vital for addressing cancer. Because we want all of those compounds, it actually improves the efficacy, it improves the response in the body, it has fewer side effects, just all around. Research says it's efficacious at 25% of the dose of the stripped down versions, which is immense cost savings, especially with cancer. So really vital. In addition, there are various other compounds in the cannabis plant. The cannabis plant will produce 165 cannabinoids that we know of. And we're learning new ones every day, so we still don't know everything. But it also produces terpenes, which you can think of like essential oils. And it produces more than 200 possible. And in any individual strain, we maybe have half a dozen that are really dominant. So you can really mix and match and get a lot of different variations. Well, there are specific terpenes that are also supported by research for addressing cancer. And so with the products that we recommend, we tend to go for those that are blended specifically for targeting cancer with both cannabinoids and terpenes.
And is CBD better than melatonin for sleep specifically?
Oh my goodness. I'm not a fan of CBD for sleep, and there's actually research calling it anti-sleep.
Oh.
It's tricky because those terpenes I just talked about really drive whether a cannabis product is more stimulating or more sedative. And CBD on its own tends to be more stimulating. And most of the CBD strains tend to be more stimulating, what we call a sativa. And really for sleep, you want more of an indica profile, which, is going to be more sedative and conducive of sleep. So I don't generally recommend CBD for sleep. I tend to recommend things like CBN if you're in a non-THC state, which is very sedative. It can help with sleep. Or we can, through our supplier, we can actually custom blend and mix and match different things to try to create the sleep blend for a specific individual, because there are so many causes of sleep disruption, as we were just discussing off camera.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends on what's causing the sleep disruption, and then we try to kind of target it appropriately.
I love the fact that he can blend per each person's needs, individually. I was listening in on one of the nurses' needs about how they were getting custom blends for some of their cancer patients.
Yeah, it's almost like a compounding cannabis service. It's very unique and also very difficult to find in this industry.
Yeah, especially with it being organic and everything else that comes in. So let's talk about patients that are currently undergoing standard of care. They commonly worry about taking supplements or anything really alongside their treatment. They can't go to the doctor and ask about it. They usually will tell them not to do anything due to that. So can cannabis products or CBD, THC be taken while on chemotherapy, immunotherapy, while people are doing radiation? Is there times that people should be off of them while doing treatment?
Absolutely. One of the caveats with cannabis therapy, cannabis as a plant has an unsurpassed safety profile, and we have used it as medicine for thousands of years. And there's no deaths ever attributed to cannabis. Very safe, very effective. But unfortunately, today, most people are taking pharmaceuticals of some form. And so the primary risk of cannabis therapy is its potential to interact with some pharmaceuticals. And certain chemotherapies are definitely on that list. So this is, once again, why it's important to consult with one of our alternative nurses or herbalists like myself, because we understand what can and cannot be combined. And even, sometimes we just have to say you need to space the dosing this many hours away. So sometimes it can be continued. Other times we need to stop it for several weeks, depending on the half-life of the chemotherapy. There are other things that we shouldn't combine as well. And since we're on this topic, if someone is taking immunotherapy, they should not be taking THC. They can actually cancel one another out, and then you're not getting the benefit of either one. So there's a wonderful article on the Heal Navigator website that I penned, but basically talking about cannabis for cancer and detailing all of the products and all of the research supporting the statements I'm making today. So if you want to delve deeper into that, I would suggest following that link that I'm sure we will provide.
Yeah, we'll provide a lot of different links in the description. So if someone's listening and they're overwhelmed by all the cannabis options out there, what would you tell them?
Call a competent medical professional. Really, cannabis can be kind of pricey. And so you want to make sure that you're choosing the right products, that they match your needs, that you're not jeopardizing your outcomes by combining them with the wrong pharmaceuticals or supplements, and that you have the guidance to really get the best possible effects. You want the best bang for your buck. Right? So it's really important that you're getting that guidance. And there's actually research supporting that patients that receive medical guidance of their cannabis therapy have much better outcomes.
Janna, can you chat about clinical data versus anecdotal evidence in terms of cannabis?
We have a lot of research supporting cannabis as an intervention for cancer, all the way back to the 1970s when we first realized that THC actually triggers apoptosis of cancer cells, meaning that it triggers these cells to commit suicide in a very natural mechanism that the body would normally utilize to get rid of them. So it's compiled since then, and we have a large database of evidence supporting this intervention. Now, in addition to that, I have also worked with thousands of patients over the last decade, helping them to optimize their cannabis therapy outcomes. And I've seen some really prolific outcomes in my patients with cancer, including complete no NED status. I had one patient with breast cancer, and it was her second round with breast cancer. She had already overcome it once. And in this second round, unfortunately, she was not tolerating the chemotherapy or radiation at all. It was making her so sick that they stopped it. She had no other options. So she used only cannabis therapy. And within about 6 months, the cancer was gone. And it was stage 4 breast cancer, mets to bones, estrogen dominant. So CBD only protocol for her. And I just heard from her maybe a month ago, and she just had her 6-year scan to make sure the cancer stayed away. And the doctor actually said it's gone, and I don't even see any signs that you ever had cancer. So she's really doing well. There was another patient who had lung cancer, and he was on hospice. He was, a little older, and was basically starving to death due to the side effects of the chemotherapy. It causes something we call cachexia, which is that rapid weight loss that we see with patients. He began just microdosing cannabis just to be able to eat. He didn't want to starve to death, which is common in cancer, unfortunately. This is why cachexia is such a priority. When I hear a patient is losing weight, that's first thing we address is let's get your weight stabilized and start adding. And some of the cannabinoids are great for that. So this man went on to get rid of the cancer, went completely NED. He graduated hospice, and he lived for another decade. He just died recently, and it was a non-cancer cause. So the cancer never ever came back. So the way that we do this is with intensive cancer intervention with the cannabis therapy to get rid of the cancer. And then once you're NED, you can expect to be on lower dosing as a maintenance to keep the cancer away the rest of your life. And it's, I should say this caveat that it's not just the cannabis either. What we do is take a whole holistic approach with our patients where we're not just looking at what can you take, but what were the contributors to the cancer that we can address and mitigate. Because really, if you don't take care of those contributors, it's very common that the cancer just returns once you resume your normal lifestyle. So we look at things like diet and stress management and activity levels. And, all of these things are really important to make sure we're addressing the causes of the cancer and stopping those so that you can have the best chance of remaining cancer-free for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the root cause, because I often tell patients that as well, that you have to get down to the nitty-gritty. Some things might load the gun, but what are those triggers that pull the trigger? So it is really important to do that root cause medicine, because as you said, oftentimes it'll come back. Maybe not in the beginning, eventually it will, because your body recognizes that as a potential threat, and then it lowers that immune system.
And there are so many contributors to cancer that can be mitigated through lifestyle changes. Things like optimizing your diet, cutting out the sugar. Sugar feeds cancer directly. Yeah. If you have hormone-driven cancer, making sure that you're addressing any hormone dominance that might be feeding those cancer cells. If you have parasites, getting rid of those. You have chronic viruses or other impacts on the immune system, making sure that you've mitigated those so that the immune system can be strong enough to keep the cancer away. That's really your most powerful ally in fighting cancer, is a strong immune system.
Yeah, you have to reduce that burden, that toxin burden in the body, and free up those fighter cells, essentially, because if all your soldier cells are busy with all this nonsense, you're not going to have anything to protect you from the cancer itself.
Absolutely. And the stress management piece. I mean, when I ask patients how they're managing their stress, sometimes there's a moment or two of silence because they think it's a trick question, but it really is vital to address stress, because the physical response to stress in the body feeds the cancer too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes things like therapy might be indicated if somebody has a lot of trauma in their past and, they feel stress or anxiety or panic disorders, things like that. I mean, all of those things need to be addressed in order to bring somebody back to whole health and give them the best chance of fighting and keeping the cancer away.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you resolve your stress by, say, having a glass of wine or a bottle of wine, because it's just not just a glass, you have those estrogen issues. I mean, it's just pouring fuel onto that fire.
Exactly it. And any alcohol is not should be ceased because alcohol turns to sugar in your body, which feeds the cancer. And this is where talking with somebody and getting to know them like we do and really delving into what is your lifestyle, what are your routines, what can be contributing, and then educating. Because you can tell patients what to do, but if they don't understand the reason why, they're a lot less likely to be compliant with what you recommend and get the optimal outcomes that are possible from those interventions. As another contributor to cancer, so really mitigating toxic influences, making sure you're eating organically, you're eating clean foods, you're drinking clean water, you're making sure your home environment doesn't have a bunch of chemicals, that your even personal care products can be a huge source of toxins. So these are all the sorts of things that we delve into with our patients to make sure that we are giving them the best possible chance of overcoming this disease.
Let's just kind of touch on the endocannabinoid system while I have you.
Absolutely. So I learned about the endocannabinoid system after being sick and becoming a cannabis patient myself. It wasn't cancer, it was something else. We won't get into it. But basically, I learned the endocannabinoid system as an autodidactic journey because I didn't learn about it in nursing school. And it's a major system in our body. It's basically the motherboard of our body. So it should be taught in nursing schools and medical schools, especially anatomy and physiology and pathophysiology, which is the origin of disease, because it's a huge piece that we are missing in our medical healthcare system right now. So basically, the endocannabinoid system, its job is to maintain balance in every other system of the body. This includes the immune system, which is where a lot of cancer originates due to its failure. This system, and homeostasis is our fancy term for optimal health balance. And every disease is a result of underlying imbalances in the body. So unfortunately, this means that you might approach a mainstream doctor or your practitioner about cannabis therapy, and they may know nothing about it. They may think it's snake oil because they hear it's good for everything, and they don't understand that supplementing with cannabis can actually interact with this system that's going to promote balance throughout the body. And that's why it's good for so many things, because it literally is linked with every other body system. The other thing they don't understand is that we make endocannabinoids. We make cannabinoids inside our bodies, and they are considered nutrients that are vital for health. They're so vital that the most prolific source of anandamide, one of these endocannabinoids, is human breast milk.
I was going to say it's in breast milk. I was reading the other
Breast
day.
milk.
Yeah.
Yep. And in so many foods as well, we can get the precursors. Omega-3 is, making sure that we have ample omega-3 intake is really important to make these endocannabinoids. Of course, omega-3s are notoriously devoid in our food system. So there are a lot of contributors, if you have a lot of imbalances because you're exposed to toxins or you don't have a good lifestyle, you're not taking care of yourself, you're going to have imbalances, which are going to tax our endocannabinoid stores. And then we can supplement with the cannabinoids from the plant, and our body doesn't really differentiate between those that we make and those from the plant, except a little bit in like duration of action, but they work on the same receptors and the same mechanisms and the same outcomes. So, I feel like if our medical community understood this, and, that combined with the fact that cannabis has an unsurpassed safety profile, we would not be recommending things like pharmaceuticals, which have horrible side effects and can be harmful or even deadly in some cases, versus this plant that has an unsurpassed safety profile. And in my experience working with thousands of patients, it's super common when someone has competent medical guidance and they follow a really well-informed protocol that they reduce their reliance or even wean off of pharmaceuticals because they don't need them anymore, because their body balances out and their symptoms go away. So it's really a vital piece of understanding cannabis therapy to understand our endocannabinoid system and the science behind them. Cannabis, unfortunately, is a competitor for many big companies and their profits. So
Follow the white rabbit, aka the money trails.
Yeah, it's a big, deep hole if you want to jump into it. It's worth doing to better understand all of this. And we're starting to talk about the federal rescheduling too. The new administration is called it a priority. The head of the DEA has said he's looking at the scheduling rationale and questioning it. And logistically, cannabis meets 0 of the 3 criteria for Schedule 1 placement. We've known this, and we actually proved this in a DEA court in 1988. Wow. And the judge actually said we should reschedule this because it doesn't belong on Schedule 1. Schedule 1 requires that it be harmful, which cannabis, 0 harm. And you can actually go to the DEA website and look up cannabis, and it says 0 deaths ever. Still, it has to have no medical use. And on the other hand, our own government holds multiple patents for cannabis specific to its therapeutic uses. Mm. And the third Schedule 1 criteria is that it must be highly addictive. And we have research supporting that cannabis is less physically addictive than things like caffeine and sugar. Mm. Now, when we talk about the potential for misuse or using it to, more of a mental type of reliance, that can certainly occur, but it's less likely when you have a competent medical professional helping you figure out your regimen to ensure that you're optimizing your function versus potentially limiting your function. And you can do that based on the types of products you used and the timing that you use them. So it's, once again, if you have medical guidance, these types of issues are far less likely.
We're personally seeing it here in Texas with legal issues with anything hemp. They were talking about pulling off anything that contained any amount of THC, which is all CBD hemp products, off the market and unable to sell. And people would go into jail and all kinds of awful things.
It's happening in California too, actually. So it's not just Texas. They're starting to limit hemp products in California. And the rationale for that is these bad players in the industry that are taking cannabis and they're subjecting it to chemical processes that are not safe and very toxic, or they're synthesizing or semi-synthesizing these products. Basically, what we've done with herbs historically is, found the active ingredient and then either made it a chemical or isolated it. And like I said, that changes the safety profile. And unfortunately, some people have been harmed by these unregulated products. So really, it's not a reflection of the plant and its safety profile. It's a reflection of the human tampering that has ruined the safety profile of the plant and those products not being regulated enough.
We want to thank Janna for sharing her vast knowledge with us today. That wraps up another episode of the Heal Navigator podcast, where we bring you the resources you need to navigate integrative and alternative cancer care. If you're exploring medical cannabis or other integrative therapies, visit healnavigator.com. We're here to support you wherever you are in your journey. You'll find all the links and resources in the description below. If you found this helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might benefit. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.